The sun peeked through scattered clouds as Maple Creek eased into another quiet Saturday. The gentle hum of traffic moved along Riverview Bridge, the town's old but sturdy crossing that spanned the sparkling flow of the Maple River below. Families were heading to the park. Couples strolled with coffee in hand, and the day had the kind of calm that made people smile for no reason. Then it happened. A sudden honk sliced through the still air, sharp and urgent. A woman driving a silver sedan slammed her brakes, causing the car behind her to swerve slightly. A delivery truck came to a loud, shuddering stop. Curious heads poked out of windows. A boy on a bicycle dropped his snack and stared wide-eyed at the scene unfolding ahead. There, on the narrow ledge of the bridge, right between the rusted metal railing and a terrifying drop, stood a German shepherd. Its tan and black fur was matted with dust, and its body trembled with every step it tried to take. It wasn't barking, just frozen, as if paralyzed by fear. The dog's paws slid helplessly against the metal as it tried, and failed, to turn around. A woman gasped and covered her mouth with both hands. An older man clutched his phone, ready to dial for help but not sure who to call. "Is that someone's dog?" someone asked. Another answered, "No collar. I think it's a stray." A teenager lifted his phone and hit record. The bridge, which had been filled with motion just moments ago, was now heavy with tension. Engines idled. Footsteps slowed. People gathered, but no one moved closer. The dog looked out over the water, then back toward the small crowd. Its eyes were wide, panicked, as if begging someone, anyone, for help. But no one moved. Everyone seemed to be waiting for someone else to take the first step. A few people shouted for animal control. One driver called out, "Don't get too close. You'll scare him off." The shepherd shuffled slightly, its back legs slipping on the ledge. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. It caught itself, barely. Some people turned away, unable to watch. And just when it felt like no one would act, no one could act. A figure stepped forward from the sidewalk. A girl, small, young, and unexpected, dropped her soccer bag to the ground and calmly walked toward the danger that had stopped everyone else cold. Emily Rivera wasn't much taller than the railing, but her presence on the bridge suddenly felt like the only thing that mattered. Her bright pink soccer cleats scuffed against the asphalt as she approached the German shepherd. She didn't hesitate, didn't stop to think about what might happen. Her heart pounded, but her movements were steady and deliberate. The crowd watched in silence, some with a growing sense of disbelief. A young girl, barely 12 years old, was about to face something none of the adults had dared to attempt. Some murmured under their breath. Others stood frozen, unsure of what would happen next. The air around them buzzed with the weight of the moment. The dog's eyes were wide and full of terror, its body stiff with panic. It took a slow, shaky step back, nearly losing its footing, but it didn't bark. There was no growling, no snapping or wild thrashing. It was as if the dog, too, realized it was stuck in a desperate situation with no way out. Its eyes locked onto Emily, searching for reassurance in the midst of its fear. But the bridge with its tall iron railings and the long drop to the river below felt like a trap, and the poor creature didn't know where to go. Emily crouched down, careful to stay low, but not too far out of reach. She spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but firm enough for the dog to hear her through the rustling of the wind. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," she said, her words simple but soothing. The dog's ears flicked at the sound of her voice, and for a moment, it seemed to relax, its body no longer trembling as violently as before. Its gaze softened, and it took a tentative step toward her, its front paws dragging along the ledge. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show that the dog was listening. The sound of a passing car and a few hurried voices broke the moment. Emily paused, but the dog remained focused on her. She reached out slowly, making no sudden movements, her hand shaking only slightly as she drew closer. Her heart raced, but she kept her breathing steady. The dog sniffed the air, then allowed her fingers to brush its fur. It wasn't the wild, frightened animal it had been moments ago. There was a flicker of trust in its eyes, a connection, however brief. In that moment, Emily knew she had just one shot. She gently pressed her palm against the dog's side, her voice never wavering. "Come on," she whispered. "Let's get you safe." The tension in the air was palpable as Emily inched closer to the German Shepherd. Her hand, now resting gently on the dog's trembling side, remained steady. The crowd around the bridge had grown larger, drawn in by the unfolding scene, but no one dared to take another step forward. A man in a yellow jacket, clearly the first to realize the danger, muttered to himself, "Somebody should do something, but not me." His eyes darted nervously to the dog, then back to Emily. He seemed to think that if he stood by long enough, someone else would make the first move. But still, nobody did. Others shared the same hesitation. A woman on her phone with the police was pacing, trying to stay calm, but growing more frantic by the second. "I don't know what's going on, but you need to get here fast," she said into the phone. "A dog's about to fall off the bridge, and no one's doing anything." But the more she spoke, the more helpless she felt. Animal control was at least 15 minutes away. The fire department could arrive sooner, but they were several blocks away. In those critical moments, Emily was the only one close enough to the dog. And yet, the crowd just watched. Some people didn't want to get involved, their voices faint with worry, muttering things like, "What if it attacks her?" Others wanted to help but weren't sure how to approach the animal. The dog had shown fear, and nobody knew if it would lash out or stay calm. But Emily's focus was unwavering. She didn't flinch when the dog shifted again, its paws scraping the metal, and her voice didn't falter when it let out a soft whine. She was committed to her goal. She would not let this dog fall. The crowd continued to murmur, unsure of what to do, but Emily blocked out the noise. She had no doubt in her mind about what needed to be done. As if the world had suddenly narrowed down to just her and the dog, she slowly moved her hand to the collar, guiding it gently, her fingers brushing the rough fabric. She knew she couldn't force the dog. It would only make things worse. But she could guide it. She could help it feel safe again. A teenager standing nearby, unsure whether to film or help, finally broke the silence. "You've got this, little lady," he whispered, as though Emily's courage gave him the permission he needed to acknowledge the moment. He wasn't the only one. A few others around the bridge nodded, murmuring words of encouragement. And then, just as Emily was about to try pulling the dog closer, there was a shift in the air, a subtle change in the tension. The dog's body relaxed just a little more. It had made a decision, and with Emily's gentle touch, it was ready to move. For a brief moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. Emily stood there, so small against the towering bridge, yet her presence seemed to fill the space. Every pair of eyes on the scene was fixed on her. She was a stranger to most of them. A young girl in soccer clothes, but at that moment, she had become the only person who mattered. No one knew her name. No one knew why she stepped forward when the adults hesitated. But what they did know was that she had taken control of a situation that none of them could. And there was something about the way she moved, so sure, so determined, that it left no room for doubt. Her fingers, still resting on the German Shepherd's side, felt the tense muscles of the dog begin to soften. It was a slow shift, subtle, yet powerful. Emily whispered again, her voice low but clear, "I'm not going to hurt you. We're getting you out of here." The dog's ears flicked at her voice, and for the first time, it stopped inching backward. The trembling lessened, just slightly, but enough to show that the dog was listening. Emily could see the faintest glimmer of trust in the dog's eyes. Its gaze softened as it looked back at her. And for a moment, the chaos around them, the frantic crowd, the honking cars, the distant sirens, faded into the background. It was just Emily and the dog. As she moved closer, Emily made sure her steps were slow and deliberate. Every movement, every sound, was calculated to avoid startling the dog. She knew the dog wasn't being stubborn. It was scared, confused, unable to see a way out. The ledge was narrow and unforgiving, but Emily wasn't afraid. The crowd watched, breathless, as she crouched to the dog's level. She didn't force it, didn't tug or pull. She waited for the dog to make the next move, offering reassurance with her presence. It was then that the dog took a small step forward. Its claws scraped the metal of the railing, but it didn't panic. Instead, it reached for her hand, a subtle sign that it was willing to trust her. The moment hung in the air. Emily knew it was time. Gently, she wrapped her fingers around the collar, securing it with a calm grip. She could feel the dog's heartbeat thudding beneath her hand, its body still tense but no longer on the brink of panic. And then, in that quiet exchange between the two of them, she pulled. Slowly, carefully. The crowd, which had been silently watching, began to breathe again. As Emily carefully gripped the German Shepherd's collar, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her. The crowd had gone silent, their eyes fixed on the small girl and the dog caught in this delicate dance of trust. For the first time since the incident began, the dog's movements were steady. It no longer seemed as though it was on the edge of panic, nor did it try to scramble away in fear. It was as though Emily's presence had cast a spell of calm over the situation. With a gentle pull, she guided the dog a little closer to her. She didn't rush. Everything had to happen at its own pace. One misstep could make the situation worse, but Emily was patient. She had always been patient with animals. Growing up in a household full of pets had taught her how to be steady, how to read body language, how to speak in the soft tones that calmed even the most skittish animals. The dog's head turned toward her, its eyes wide but now not as fearful. She could see the tiredness in its face, the exhaustion from being trapped in such a vulnerable position for whom knew how long. It wasn't angry or aggressive, it was just scared. And that fear was beginning to fade under Emily's steady hand and calm voice. "Easy boy," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft rustling of the wind. "We're almost there." The crowd, still frozen in awe, hadn't moved a muscle. Their attention was locked on Emily as if she was performing some sort of delicate, unspoken magic. Some of the bystanders whispered among themselves, half in disbelief, half in admiration. "Look at her. She's just a kid," one of them murmured. "That dog trusts her. Look at that," another said. Emily, however, didn't hear them. She was too focused on the task at hand. As she slowly pulled the dog closer to her, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew the next few moments would be critical. The dog was no longer as close to the edge, but it was still vulnerable. It needed to be led carefully off the ledge, and she had to make sure it was ready to move. The dog stepped forward, its paws dragging on the ground, its body still stiff. But then, something changed. With one more gentle nudge, Emily felt the dog's muscles relax. The tension that had built up in its body seemed to ebb away. The dog's head lowered slightly, and it took a hesitant but purposeful step toward her. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. They were almost there. "Just a little more," she whispered. The bridge, now quiet except for Emily's soft murmurs, felt like a world apart from the chaos of just moments before. The dog was no longer trapped by fear. The moment hung between them, Emily and the dog, poised on the edge of a life-changing decision. The crowd, now holding their collective breath, watched in anticipation. The only sounds were the faint rustle of the wind through the trees and the soft patter of Emily's breath, steady and controlled. Emily's heart raced, but she kept her focus. The dog's body was no longer trembling as violently as before. The earlier panic had subsided, replaced by an almost imperceptible trust. Its eyes, still wide but no longer desperate, met hers once again. Emily knew she was so close. She glanced at the ground below them, where the river twisted and churned beneath the bridge. It was a long way down, too far for anyone to survive a fall. The dog wasn't just trapped, it was teetering on the brink of disaster. But Emily wasn't thinking about the height or the risk. She was thinking about the dog, about getting it to safety, about showing it the way out. Slowly, she gave the collar a gentle tug. The dog's front paws scraped against the metal railing, but it didn't stumble. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Time felt like it was standing still as Emily pulled just a bit further, careful not to startle the dog. One wrong move, one sudden motion, and the situation could spiral out of control. But Emily remained steady. She moved the dog inch by inch, leading it carefully back from the edge. As she shifted her weight, she pressed her body close to the railing to give the dog more room. Her other hand was still lightly holding the collar, and she guided the dog away from the metal bars, inching toward the safety of the wider path. A collective sigh rippled through the crowd as the dog's back legs shifted away from the ledge, its body inching closer to solid ground. People began to move, unconsciously leaning forward, as though they could will the dog to safety. The tension in the air seemed to ease, but Emily wasn't finished yet. She took another step, using the small space she had on the ledge to make sure there was no sudden movement. She needed to be sure. The dog, still unsure but following her gentle direction, stepped forward. It was a slow process, but each step brought them closer to safety. Emily's grip on the collar tightened slightly, and the dog's body came even closer to the firm concrete walkway. Then, with a final, soft step, the German Shepherd was safely on the solid ground of the bridge. A sound swept through the crowd. Applause, cheers, and shouts of relief. Emily, still kneeling, stayed with the dog, her hand now resting gently on its side. The dog was no longer trembling. It sat down next to her, tail wagging weakly, but with unmistakable gratitude. The bridge, once full of silent tension, now buzzed with the energy of a rescue that had left everyone breathless. The moment the German Shepherd's paws hit solid ground, a wave of emotion swept over the crowd. The once tense and anxious atmosphere transformed into one of pure relief and admiration. People started clapping, some cheering, others simply exhaling in relief, as if they'd all been holding their breath together since the rescue began. Emily, still kneeling next to the dog, looked up to see the entire bridge filled with people watching her. Her face flushed, not from the physical exertion, but from the overwhelming response of the crowd. She had never expected this level of attention. She hadn't even thought about what anyone might say. She just saw a dog in trouble and did what she felt needed to be done. The dog, now safe, seemed to understand that it was no longer in danger. It lifted its head and wagged its tail gently, a soft, grateful gesture that made the crowd's applause grow louder. The noise from the crowd seemed to pulse around them, but Emily stayed grounded. She could feel the dog's warmth beside her, its body relaxing against the cold bridge floor, clearly exhausted but free from the fear it had held for so long. A man in a red baseball cap stepped forward, his eyes bright with admiration. "That was incredible," he said, crouching down to Emily's level. "You're a real hero." Emily blinked, not entirely sure how to respond. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, much less being called a hero. She just smiled shyly and patted the dog on its head. "He's the real hero," she said softly, looking down at the dog, who responded by licking her hand. As the applause continued, an elderly woman who had been watching from the sidewalk approached Emily. She knelt down beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've got a brave heart, young lady," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not everyone would have stepped up like you did." Emily's eyes flickered up to meet the woman's gaze, a little overwhelmed but touched by the kind words. The words brave and hero seemed like a lot to live up to, but in her heart, Emily knew she had simply done what felt right in the moment. Soon, the sound of sirens reached their ears as animal control finally arrived. They approached with calm, professional efficiency, checking the dog for injuries and preparing to take it to a nearby shelter. But as they began to lead the dog away, it paused and looked back at Emily. She held her breath, but then the dog slowly approached her, resting its head against her leg for a moment before it was gently guided into the van. The crowd slowly began to disperse, their chatter fading as people returned to their daily routines. But Emily stayed there for a moment longer, watching as the dog was driven away to safety. It wasn't just the rescue that felt important. It was the connection, the brief, silent bond between her and the dog, that made this moment unforgettable. As the animal control van turned the corner and disappeared from sight, the crowd that had once been so captivated by the rescue slowly began to break apart. Some people returned to their cars, others made their way back to the park, and a few lingered, exchanging stories of the unexpected drama that had unfolded before them. Emily remained standing at the edge of the bridge, still processing the events of the last hour. She had always liked animals, had always felt a special connection to them. But today, it felt as though something had shifted, something deep inside her heart. She wasn't sure what had driven her to act the way she did, to step forward when everyone else hesitated. Maybe it was just instinct, maybe it was a deep-seated compassion. But whatever it was, she knew it was a part of her now. The bond she'd formed with the German Shepherd, however fleeting, had left a mark on her. Her parents arrived soon after, pulling up to the side of the road as they spotted Emily still standing near the spot where the dog had been rescued. They had heard about the commotion from some friends, but hadn't fully understood what had happened until they saw their daughter standing there. "Emily, what are you doing out here?" her mom called as she stepped out of the car, concern in her voice. "I was helping," Emily replied simply, her voice soft but steady. Her dad smiled as he approached. "Helping?" he asked, though he already had an inkling of what had happened. "Did you rescue a dog?" Emily nodded, her face flushing a little. "Yeah, I guess I did." The smile on her father's face grew, and he placed an arm around her shoulders. "Well, I'd say you did an amazing job." His voice was filled with pride, though there was a touch of awe in it as well. Her mother, who had been pacing around the car, finally took a deep breath. "I'm glad you're safe. But next time, maybe you could wait for the professionals to handle it, okay?" Emily laughed softly. "I guess I just couldn't wait." As they began walking back to the car, Emily caught a glimpse of something on the ground, just a few steps away from where the dog had been. It was a small, worn leather collar, discarded in the chaos. She knelt down, picking it up, and for a brief moment felt the connection again. Maybe the dog will be okay now, Emily thought. Maybe this was just the beginning of something new for both of us. With that thought, Emily tucked the collar into her pocket, ready to return home, knowing that in some small way, she had made the world a little bit better that day.